The cockpit vibrated like a living creature in its death throes. Lieutenant James Harker's fuel gauge trembled at 1/8. The oxygen regulator hissed thin mountain air into his mask. Through the plexiglass canopy, 3 Focke-Wulf 90s carved contrails against the winter sky. Sleek, predatory, closing the distance with mechanical precision. Viper lead. You can't outturn them. The radio crackled with his wingman's voice, already fading east toward safety. Break off. Break off now. Harker's hand tightened on the control stick. The P-47 Thunderbolt beneath him, 7 tons of American steel and fury, wasn't built for ballet. It was built to fall like a hammer. His mind flickered through every tactical manual, every training drill, every bitter lesson learned at 23,000 feet. Then instinct whispered something the instructors never taught. He pulled the stick hard, right, and rolled inverted. For one impossible heartbeat, the world inverted with him. Sky became earth. Earth became sky, and enemy tracers clawed upward through what should have been down. Blood rushed to his temples. The horizon screamed. His thumb found the trigger. 5 minutes later, 5 enemy fighters were falling through French clouds, and James Harker was still breathing. This is not only the story of a dogfight, this is a journey inside the human mind at its breaking point, where fear crystallizes into precision, where survival is rewritten by a single decision made in the space between heartbeats. The briefing room at RAF Bodny smelled of burnt coffee and mildewed maps. January 1945. The war was supposedly winding down, but nobody told that to the Luftwaffe. James Harker sat in the 3rd row, his flight jacket still cold from the pre-dawn walk across the airfield. Around him, 23 pilots shifted in metal folding chairs, their faces illuminated by the pale glow of projector light. On the screen, a grainy reconnaissance photo of a rail yard near Kassel. Red circles marked flak batteries, blue arrows showed the ingress route. Gentlemen, this is a milk run, the intelligence officer said, his voice betraying the lie. Nothing was a milk run anymore. Harker's hands rested on his knees, steady. They'd learned to be steady. Before the war, these hands rebuilt tractor engines on his father's farm. Outside Bakersfield, patient work, methodical, where problems had solutions, and you could see what you fixed. The P-47's engine was just bigger, more complex, but still mechanical, still knowable. It was the sky that couldn't be fixed. He'd written a letter that morning, the way he did before every mission. Dear Anna, the weather here is cold, but clear. I'm thinking about that lemon tree behind your mother's house, the one that always blooms too early. He never mentioned the flying, never mentioned the part of him that stayed at altitude even after he landed. The version of himself that lived between cloud banks where decisions compressed into milliseconds and every choice was binary: live or die, left or right, fire or hold. Harker! He looked up. The squadron commander, Major Kellerman, was watching him with those tired eyes that had seen too many empty chairs at dinner. You're flying Viper Lid today. Mitchell's coming down with something. The room's attention shifted subtly. Viper Lid meant the tip of the spear, first to engage, first to draw fire. The odds were arithmetic. Lid the formation enough times, and eventually the arithmetic wins. Harker nodded once. Yes, sir. Outside, the ground crew was already warming engines. The sound rolled across the frozen grass like distant thunder, that deep thrumming pulse that vibrated in your chest cavity that you felt more than heard. 56 cylinders of Pratt & Whitney radial engine, 2,500 horses of controlled violence. He walked toward his aircraft, P-47D, tail number 26498, nicknamed Anna's Promise in fading yellow paint, and performed his ritual. Left wheel first, checking tire pressure by sight. Wing surfaces for frost. Fuel cap secure. Control surfaces moving freely. His crew chief, Sergeant Doherty, watched from the wing root. wrench in hand. "She's tight, Lieutenant." Topped off the tanks, checked the guns twice. Ammo count: 400 rounds per gun. All tracer mixed like you wanted. Harker climbed the wing, each handhold familiar as prayer. The cockpit smelled of hydraulic fluid and old leather. He settled into the seat, contoured to his shape, now after 87 missions, and began the startup sequence. Fuel mixture rich, magnetos armed. Throttle cracked. The engine caught with a cough, then roared. Through the vibration, through the noise, his heartbeat found its combat rhythm. Slow, controlled. The body preparing for what the mind couldn't yet accept was coming. In the back of his consciousness, like a film reel stuck on repeat, the dream played again, the one where he was falling upside down through an endless sky, watching the earth spin above him, unable to tell which way was up. He'd had it every night for a week. He pushed the throttle forward and taxied toward the dawn. Formation flying was meditation disguised as violence. Harker held position 3 feet off Major Kellerman's right wing as the squadron climbed through 8,000 feet. 16 P-47s in finger 4 formations. Stepping up through the winter sky like a steel staircase, the sun broke over the English Channel, turning the cloud deck below into an ocean of gold. At this altitude, the cold bit through flight suit and gloves. Harker's breath came steady into the oxygen mask. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way they'd trained. Hypoxia was subtle. It made you stupid before it made you unconscious. The first sign was euphoria. The sensation that everything was fine, perfectly fine, even as your vision narrowed to a tunnel. Viper flight. Check in. His voice sounded distant in his own ears, filtered through rubber and static. Viper 2, good. Viper 3, good. Viper 4, 5x5. His element, 3 other pilots who'd learned to read his movements, to anticipate his decisions. In combat, there was no time for radio chatter. You flew by instinct, by peripheral vision, by the faith that your wingman would be where he was supposed to be. The P-47 Thunderbolt was not a graceful aircraft. The Luftwaffe pilots called it Die Jug, the jug, for its massive radial engine cowling. It couldn't dogfight with a Messerschmitt 10E9 in a turning battle. Physics wouldn't allow it. The German fighters were lighter, tighter, built for the carousel of aerial combat. But the P-47 could dive, and it could take punishment. And in the hands of a pilot who understood its nature, who worked with its weight instead of against it, it became something else entirely. Harker's instructor at Thunderbolt Transition School, a gravel-voiced captain named Voss, had explained it during a night session in the ready room. Gentlemen, fear is a chemical reaction. Adrenaline dumps into your bloodstream, your pupils dilate, your heart rate spikes to 180, maybe 200 beats per minute. At that point, you experience time dilation. Everything seems to slow down because your brain is processing sensory data faster than normal. This is good. This is your body giving you an edge. But there's a threshold. Push past 220 beats per minute, and the neocortex shuts down. No more rational thought, pure lizard brain. You'll pull so hard on the stick, you'll black out, or freeze, or make some catastrophic mistake. The only trick that matters, is staying just below that threshold. Controlled panic, fear that sharpens instead of blinds. Captain Voss died over Bremen 2 months later. His P-47 went down trailing smoke, and nobody saw a shoot. But the lesson remained. They crossed into German airspace at 22,000 feet. The landscape below transformed patchwork farmland, replaced by industrial scars, rivers of frozen silver cutting through brown winter fields. Somewhere down there, people were living their lives, hanging laundry, baking bread, pretending the bombers overhead were just weather. Bogies, 11 o'clock high. Kellerman's voice, flat with concentration. Count 6, maybe 8, Fw-190s. Harker's eyes snapped to the clock position. At first, nothing, just glare and distance. Then the glint of canopy glass, small dark shapes, separating from a cloud bank, still 5 miles out, but closing fast. His heartbeat accelerated. Not panic, just the body reading the situation, releasing the chemicals it needed. The squadron maintained formation. No one broke, not yet. In aerial combat, the first to break formation often died alone. The German fighters came in high, diving out of the sun, the oldest tactic in the book. Harker watched them separate into two elements. 4 would engage head-on, trying to scatter the formation. The others would swing wide, picking off stragglers. Viper flight, prepare to engage. On my call, the radio dissolved into static and staccato, bursts of German. Achtung! Amerikanische Thunderbolts, dry war. Then the sky came apart. Combat had no narrative. It was sensory data arriving faster than comprehension. Flash of tracer, orange-red threads weaving through the formation. The sharp crack, crack, crack of cannon rounds passing overhead. Someone screaming on the radio, the smell of cordite leaking into the cockpit. Harker's hands moved before his conscious mind registered movement. Stick right, throttle forward, rudder to counter the yaw. An Fw-190 flashed past his canopy, inverted, so close he could see the pilot's leather helmet, the yellow nose paint, the individual rivets on the fuselage. He pulled through, tracking, but the German was already gone, swallowed by the chaos of 16 Allied and 8 Axis fighters churning through 3,000 feet of airspace. Tunnel vision set in. The edges of his peripheral vision darkened. He could see only what was directly ahead. The instruments, the gun sight, the fragmentary snapshots of friend and enemy. Breathe, breathe, throttle, rudder, airspeed 380. Altitude dropping. Viper 3 exploded. One moment, the P-47 was in formation. The next, it was a cloud of aluminum confetti and burning fuel. No radio call, no time for fear, just gone. Harker's jaw clenched. He keyed the radio. Viper flight, break into defensive pairs. 2, you're with me. The formation scattered into survival geometry. He spotted a lone Fw-190 below, fixated on a crippled T-47 trailing smoke. Harker rolled inverted and pulled through into a split S, trading altitude for speed. The G-forces crushed him into the seat. 5 Gs, maybe 6, blood draining from his head, vision graying at the edges. The 19 grew in his gun sight. He fired a 2-second burst. Tracers walked across the enemy's wing route. Pieces flew off. The German fighter rolled hard left and dove, trailing white coolant vapor. No time to confirm the kill. Already 2 more were turning into him. This was where the P-47's advantages evaporated. In a turning fight, the lighter Focke-Wulfs could outmaneuver him every time. They could turn inside his radius, get angles, position for a killing shot. You can't outturn them. Harker's hands were steady on the controls, but his mind was calculating probabilities, running through options with the cold clarity that came just before the threshold. Dive, they'll follow and shoot on the way down. Climb, bleed speed, become a sitting target. Run, abandon the element. Leave Viper 2 alone. None of the options were good. His eyes flicked to the altimeter, 18,000 feet. Airspeed 340 and building, fuel 1/8 tank. Ammunition maybe 60 rounds left per gun. The 2 19s closed from his 7 o'clock, scissoring to bracket him. Classic pincer. In 30 seconds, they'd have firing solutions. Then, rising from somewhere beneath conscious thought, beneath training, beneath fear, a memory surfaced. Not a memory, a sensation. The dream, falling upside down. The world inverted. The strange, disorienting moment when his brain couldn't parse which direction was up. And suddenly, he saw it. The impossible angle. The one chance. There was no time to think. Thinking was the enemy. Harker's hand moved. Control stick hard right. Rudder full deflection. The P-47 snapped into a roll. The horizon rotated. Sky became earth. Earth became sky. His harness straps bit into his shoulders as gravity tried to tear him from the seat. The engine screamed. Loose items in the cockpit, pencil, map fragments, dust, floated upward toward the canopy. He was inverted, flying upside down at 340 knots. The blood rushed to his head, pressure building behind his eyes. The world made no sense. Every instinct screamed to roll back upright, to restore the natural order. But he held the inverted position and pulled back on the stick, which was now down because everything was reversed. The P-47 arced through the inverted turn, tighter than physics should allow. The pursuing Fw-190s, conditioned by 10,000 hours of muscle memory, followed the natural expectation that a fighter in distress would dive or climb. They weren't prepared for prey that flipped the geometry. Negative jams. The human body wasn't built for this. Blood vessels in the eyes burst. The horizon pulsed red at the edges. Harker's breathing came in sharp gasps against the pressure, but his hands stayed steady. The gun sights swam in his vision, instruments reading backward, altimeter unwinding as the inverted pull dragged him higher instead of lower. He focused on the one thing that mattered, the lead Fw-190, now emerging into his field of view as the inverted turn brought him nose to nose with his pursuer. Both aircraft closing at a combined speed of 600 miles per hour, 3 seconds to firing solution. 2 seconds. 1. Harker's thumb found the trigger. The 8 M2 Browning machine guns roared. A bass note that rattled his teeth. Tracers reached out across the shrinking distance, orange lines connecting predator and prey. The Fw-90's propeller exploded first, fragments spinning away like shrapnel. Then the engine cowling peeled back. Fire bloomed. The German fighter rolled left, trying to evade, but the closure rate was too high. Harker's stream of 50 caliber rounds walked across the cockpit. The canopy shattered. The 90 shuddered and fell away, tumbling, no longer controlled. No time to watch. The second 90 was already firing, yellow muzzle flashes from its nose cannon. Shells walked past Harker's wing, so close he could feel the pressure waves. Still inverted, he pulled harder, the G-forces now pushing blood toward his brain instead of away. His vision cleared slightly. The world was still wrong, still inverted, but his body was adapting, finding equilibrium in the wrongness. The second 19 made a mistake. It tried to follow the inverted turn, but the pilot wasn't prepared. He overcorrected, his aircraft shuddering as it approached stall speed in the unusual attitude. Harker rolled upright, the world snapping back to its proper orientation, and the relief was like surfacing from deep water. He pulled lead, tracking the wounded enemy as it struggled to recover. Another burst. Shorter this time, 15 rounds, maybe 20. Enough. The Fw-190's tail assembly separated from the fuselage. The aircraft pitched forward and entered a terminal spin, trailing smoke and pieces of aluminum skin. The sky was suddenly empty. Harker throttled back, his hands trembling now, adrenaline backwash flooding his system. The radio crackled with distant voices, his squadron reforming, calling out positions, checking damage. He was alone in his sector of sky. The two 90s were falling through 15,000 feet, trailing debris and smoke. No parachutes. He looked for them, but knew he wouldn't see them. At that altitude, in that spin, the pilots were already unconscious or dead. His mouth was dry. His head throbbed from the negative diaz. When he touched his face, his glove came away spotted with blood from burst capillaries around his eyes. The fuel gauge read 1/16, maybe 20 minutes of flight time. Viper lid. Viper 2, you still with us? He keyed the radio, his voice steadier than he felt. Viper lid, affirmative, heading home. The formation coalesced around him as he turned west. 12 P-47s remained of the original 16, 4 empty spaces in the sky where men used to be. Below, France unrolled in winter brown and gray. The sign caught the afternoon light like hammered tin. Somewhere down there, people were living their lives, unaware that the sky above them had just been a killing ground. Harker's heartbeat began to slow. The tunnel vision released. He became aware of his body again. The ache in his shoulders, the rawness in his throat, the way his legs were shaking against the rudder pedals. 5 minutes of combat. It felt like 5 hours. He didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow. Ref Bodny appeared through the haze at 1600 hours. The runway was a dark slash against winter-brown fields. The control tower, a gray finger pointing at a colorless sky. Harker's engine coughed as he turned onto final approach. The fuel gauges read 0. He was flying on fumes and prayers. The P-47 settled toward the runway with the grace of a falling anvil, touching down hard, the tires barking against concrete. He taxied to the hard stand on momentum alone. The engine died as he cut the mixture, the propeller windmilling to a stop. For a moment, he just sat there, hands still gripping the control stick, unable to make his fingers release. The ground crew swarmed the aircraft. Sergeant Doherty climbing the wing, popping the canopy latch, fresh air rushing in to replace the stink of cordite and sweat. Jesus Christ, Lieutenant, your bird looks like Swiss cheese. Harker forced himself to look. The right wing was cratered with cannon strikes. A hole the size of a dinner plate gaped in the fuselage, behind the cockpit. If that shell had hit 6 inches forward, he unbuckled his harness with numb fingers and climbed out. His legs nearly gave out on the wing, the adrenaline crash hitting like a physical weight. Doherty caught his arm, steadied him. Easy, sir. We got you. The other pilots were gathering near the operations shack. Someone had already broken out a bottle of something amber. Major Kellerman was there, his face gray with exhaustion, counting heads. 12 birds returned. 16 went out. Harker walked past the celebration, past the backslaps and the nervous laughter of men who'd just touched death and lived. He walked to the maintenance hangar and stood in the shadows, looking at his hands. They weren't shaking anymore. They were completely steady. That was worse somehow. The barracks were empty at dusk. Everyone else was at the officers' club, drinking away the mission, converting fear into noise and bravado. Harker sat on his bunk, a piece of V-mail paper on his knee, a pencil in his hand. Dear Anna, he stopped, started again. Dear Anna, I'm still here. The pencil hovered. What else could he say? That he'd killed 2 men today? That he'd rolled his aircraft upside down and watched the world invert? That in the moment of pulling the trigger, he'd felt nothing. No rage, no satisfaction, just the cold mechanical necessity of survival. That the absence of feeling was what haunted him most? I'm still here, but I left something up there. He couldn't write that, couldn't burden her with the truth that part of him, the part that used to fix tractors and worry about lemon trees blooming too early, had stayed at 20,000 feet, frozen in the moment between heartbeats, locked in the geometry of killing or being killed. He folded the paper, unfinished, and slipped it into his footlocker. Outside, the sound of aircraft engines warming for the night patrol. The war continued. It always continued. He lay back on the bunk and closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, the mission replayed in fragments, the flash of tracers, the pressure of negative Gs, the inverted horizon, the moment when instinct overrode training and he'd done something impossible. Major Kellerman found him there an hour later. Intelligence wants a debrief on the engagement. Said you pulled some kind of maneuver they'd never seen before. The major's voice was careful, neutral. You okay, Harker? Yes, sir. That's not what I asked. Harker sat up, rubbed his face. His eyes felt full of sand. I'm still trying to figure out what happened up there. Kellerman nodded slowly. He'd flown in the First War, back when aircraft were canvas and wire. He'd seen enough to know that the hardest battles weren't the ones you fought in the sky. You did good today. Saved Viper 2's life. Maybe others. He paused at the door. But doing good doesn't mean it feels good. Remember that. After he left, Harker sat in the gathering darkness and thought about what clarity meant. Everyone imagined it as light breaking through clouds, as sudden understanding, as the fog lifting. But the clarity he'd found today was different. It was the clarity of reduced options, of absolute necessity, of the mind stripping away everything except the next move, the next breath, the next heartbeat. It wasn't enlightenment. It was survival refined to its purest form. And he couldn't shake the feeling that something in him had broken, or maybe just finally showed its true shape, in the moment when the world turned upside down and he decided not to turn it back. The photograph is black and white, slightly faded, kept in a frame on a desk in Bakersfield, California. A young man in a flight jacket stands in front of a P-47 Thunderbolt. His face is unlined, his eyes clear. He's smiling, but there's something in the expression, a distance, a knowledge that suggests he's looking at something beyond the camera. Anna's promise is painted on the aircraft's nose in fresh yellow letters. James Harker returned from the war with a distinguished flying cross and a quietness his wife Anna never quite understood. He didn't talk about the missions, didn't attend the reunion, built a successful aviation repair business, and lived a good life. 3 children, 5 grandchildren, a small house with a lemon tree in the backyard that he tended with obsessive care. But every year, on January 11th, the anniversary of the mission, he would walk out into his workshop and sit alone for an hour in the darkness. Anna never asked what he was thinking about. Some silences were too important to break. History records Lieutenant Harker's engagement on January 11, 1945, as a double kill. 2 confirmed Fw-190s destroyed in aerial combat. The tactical report mentions an unusual inverted maneuver, but provides no detail. The technique was never officially taught, never entered the training manuals. But among pilots who flew the P-47, a story circulated, a legend almost, about a man who flipped the world upside down and in that inverted moment found a kind of clarity that only exists at the edge of impossible. The story isn't really about aviation, though. It's about what happens in the human mind when fear and necessity collide, when every option seems wrong, and the only path forward is through the geometry of the impossible. We all face those moments, not at 20,000 feet with enemy fighters on our tail, but in the quieter battles of life, the diagnosis, the loss, the moment when the safe path disappears and we're left with only instinct and the question, will I freeze or will I act? James Harker chose to act. He rolled inverted when every instinct screamed to stay upright. He held the stick steady when his vision was blurred with blood and his body was screaming for release. And in doing so, he discovered something that soldiers and surgeons and anyone who operates at the edge of human capability eventually learns: clarity isn't the absence of fear. It's fear compressed into absolute focus. It's the moment when the mind stops arguing with reality and simply responds. The sky doesn't remember the battles fought inside it. The clouds reform. The contrails fade. The Earth continues its rotation, indifferent to the small dramas of men and machines. But we have to remember, not the kills or the medals or the tactical victories, but the deeper truth, that in the moment when the world inverts, when up becomes down and certainty dissolves, the human mind is capable of extraordinary things, not because we're fearless, but because we act anyway. In his diary, found after his death in 2003, James Harker wrote this entry dated January 11, 1995. 50 years to the day after the mission, people ask what I was thinking when I rolled inverted. The truth is, I wasn't thinking at all. Thought would have killed me. There was only the moment, the movement, the absolute necessity of the next breath. The sky was never the enemy. It was my own heartbeat I had to master. The terror that threatened to freeze my hands, the panic that wanted to pull me into a terminal spin. I learned something up there that I spent 50 years trying to explain. Fear doesn't make you weak. Fear that you refuse to act on makes you weak. The difference is everything. The photograph on the desk shows a young pilot smiling in front of his aircraft. But if you look closely, if you really look, you can see it in his eyes. He's already somewhere else, already at altitude, already in the inverted moment where the world makes no sense, and the only thing that matters is whether your hands stay steady or freeze. He's still there in some way. We all are, trapped and freed by the decisions we make in the space between heartbeats. When everything is upside down and the only way forward is through, the sky remembers nothing. But we remember everything.